One other thing I wanted to talk about today are the spiritual communities I believe exist in this world. So I naturally promote that we're only supposed to eat fruit. And I think it's kind of like part of the big aha moment of the game, because I think there are other worlds outside of this world. And I think that you have to be willing to let go of your attachment to really anything in this world in order to essentially show the higher level entity beings that you know how to operate as a higher level being. Because higher level beings, from what my intuition has told me, is they don't poison themselves. So, for me, my consciousness is very high, but I still have these habits that piss me off, to be honest. And so I've been working really hard to rewire them and try to understand, where is this coming from, right? Like, where did this habit develop? Not just from my own lifetime, but collectively within all of the collective, because we're all connected. So you'll find that as you are shown more and more truths about reality and why it's set up this way and why we're here, etc., you have to process like the polarity energetically that is currently existing in the entire world of how it's operating, which is why there are days where you might be extremely emotional or extremely heavy. Like today I worked out and I'm gonna go for a walk, but like I was so tired. All I wanted to do was lay. And I think for me, I've had to battle this constant like addiction to stimulation, because when I was a child, I was very perceptive of reality. And I think that I got bored really easily in school. And so I started, taking pills when I was like pretty young, like 12 or 13, to dull my spiritual sight so I could actually coexist with people on a daily basis. And I remember I would come home from school, like when I was in high school, and I would take naps, like just like the day exhausted me. And then the only reason I made it through college at the time was with Adderall. And then, Adderall got me through when I would work in corporate. And then I realized I didn't need Adderall. But when I got to a point where I started to realize that I saw so much, I was relying still on sometimes coffee, because coffee suppresses your emotional perception of reality. So you're able to perceive things on coffee, like caffeine or even Adderall, but the emotions that come with that perception get dulled until like later in the evening when the Adderall starts wearing off or the coffee starts to wear off, and then the emotions heighten. And then this is when people usually are battling their mind and they try to distract themselves, and they'll either cling to alcohol or food or whatever other addiction they've created, not realizing that this like up and down behavioral pattern is coming from the consumption, and that in reality we're supposed to just go with the flow of how we're feeling. So if we create a society, even like a working society, right, where we still run businesses and things, but we just need to be more understanding that everyone is sensitive to other people's spiritual patterns, and some people perceive more than others, and be willing to talk about that and call people out and hold people accountable to a standard. Because when I recruited in corporate and in with a bunch of companies when I did agency, what I saw is a lot of leaders really making excuses for poor behavior, right? Like it was because they were also fearful that if that person left, then they would, just the fact they would have to hire and train someone was exhausting, but they weren't seeing it through a spiritual lens. So the reason I was really good at recruiting when that's what I did is because I saw everyone from a spiritual landscape, and I was able to perceive what people matched with who to get them to a higher place. Also making sure that the person that was receiving that into their team or their group or into the company would be able to handle that spiritual influence. And so what I found is some people thought they wanted something, and they really did need that. But once it came, it was almost confronting to the way they were operating, that sometimes they would push it away. So it was very interesting. So I feel really called to do this because I really want people to grasp that when you have the gift of sight, right? When you can perceive, like, if someone's really good or not good, and everyone's innately good at their core, I believe, but some people have more darkness than others. That doesn't mean that you need to be around that, right? Like, they need to overcome that aspect, and they're feeding spiritual communities inside of their mind or actions that are in a much darker place than maybe you currently exist in. And your ability to perceive that is perfectly fine, and you can put boundaries and step away from that. And in fact, most people who exist in higher level spiritual communities, part of the goal of why they're here is to awaken to the fact that they already exist at a higher plane, and to put boundaries up to allow people that are operating negative communities, more darkness, so they can have the opportunity to become aware. Because a lot of people create, including myself, we create unconscious negative habits, or we create situations in reality to create a certain nervous system feeling inside of ourselves, because that's what we became comfortable with when we were growing up. And so we naturally will recreate that scenario over and over and over again, whether it's in relationships, jobs, etc. It's an addiction to a certain state. Well, what happens when you awaken or you remember your true state is you start to realize that that way of how you've operated isn't the only way to live. And you essentially have to be willing to let that pattern inside of you die. And it literally feels like you're dying, because what's happening is your identity to this specific way of operating that you've attached safety to in your body is not real. And so you have to be willing to allow God to cleanse you of that way of being, so you can go back into the light and be shown a higher way of being, one that doesn't create constant inner turmoil, fight or flight, and just learn that to be at peace. And when you get to a state of peace, then you'll realize how the world works, that you can call spirit, let me take a step back. Everything you've ever done in your life is because a spiritual entity has been in your orbit and you've chosen to act out that thought. And all of the spirits come from one source, which is God. So all of the spiritual communities have different levels and layers of intelligence inside of them, with different, they have different perceptions of reality. And you, as the player, can choose what you allow into your field. And you may not always know the higher level that's coming into you, but you have to be willing to let go of whatever level you're operating on in order to receive that new level. So if you're, operating a specific way and it's not working for you anymore, there may be a period, from what I've personally experienced, where you're kind of in limbo and you're not being told to act yet. And from what I've learned, it's because the nervous system has to rewire first, because if you were told to act out a higher way of being before your nervous system has had time to adapt, you would collapse. It would overwhelm your system. And so there is this major integration period, I'm currently going through it right now, where my old way of being and just how I perceive reality in my life, it's dead. I can't ever go back. My perception and everything is gone. And I have this sight and it won't turn off. And I'm realizing I can't turn it off. It's always on, and this is who I am. And I'm realizing I have to embrace it. And then I have to be willing to move forward in my life, trusting that I'm going to be guided accordingly with this gift that I have, in hopes that it helps other people, and that is my only job. And I've always wanted to be of service of others. All of my life, I've always served other people, but this is the greatest service, right? Is healing myself so I can speak truth to people in hopes that they might find it inside of themselves to heal themselves, so they realize that there's a higher path living in this world than the way we currently are operating right now.